Ambassador Janet Sanderson.
Thank you, Steve. You want to kill a room, you talk about when you graduated from William and Mary, I'll tell you. Thank you very much for your warm welcome. I'm delighted to be back here. When I was working for the State Department, I didn't get back to William and Mary very much, but since I've retired, I've been making up for lost time. And I'm really pleased to have a chance to talk to you all this afternoon because I am, too, a graduate of Model UN programs in high school. I ran a Model UN program in my very brief academic career at the University of Arizona, and I know the work and the enthusiasm and the fun and the stressing that goes into preparing for a Model United Nations. And then, of course, there's all the stuff that you all have to do. So I think you're looking forward to a weekend of fun and manipulation and talking and debate and sleepless nights and an occasional reward and party. So it's pretty much like the real UN. Before I start, though, let me thank the members of the International Relations Club who have put this together, as they do for other Model UN programs that they conduct every year. This is an enormous undertaking, and I have had the opportunity to talk to various members of the IR Club over the years, and I've rarely met a group of individuals who are so dedicated, so committed, and so energetic about what they do. I also appreciate the kind invitation of our Secretary General to talk to you today, and I'm really looking forward to an opportunity to share with you, very briefly, since I know your time is valuable, a little bit about what I think regarding the UN. So what I'd like to do tonight is share with you a little bit of my own experience and how this journey that you've made to Williamsburg today could very well impact on the rest of your life. Now, regardless of what you do at the end of this weekend, where you end up in college or where you end up in your career, I'm firmly convinced that the skills, the aptitudes, and the efforts that you put in this weekend will hold you in good stead in the future. You know, Steve highlighted my diplomatic background, and it's very true that over almost 35 years with the State Department, I had a lot of interaction with the UN. I was with them in various instances in Haiti, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Algeria, in Bangladesh. And so, in a way, I'm probably a good person to pontificate about the importance of the UN. What Steve didn't tell you is I am also known in the State Department as one of the people who almost lost the Secretary General. We had a visit by then Secretary General Kofi Annan when I was in our embassy in Amman, Jordan. King Hussein of Jordan had just died, and President Clinton and 3 of his former presidential colleagues were flying in to attend the funeral. This was a very big event, obviously. And the presidents, all 4 of them, had their own bodyguards, their own Secret Service, their own cars, their own bag holders, their own this, their own that. And at the end of the cable that announced this delegation coming towards our embassy was a PS. By the way, the Secretary General of the United Nations will be coming with President Clinton. We weren't expecting him, but since I was managing the overall delegation, I immediately selected a member of my staff to keep an eye on the Secretary General. This is called control officer work. And what that basically means is you, as a control officer, are in charge of making sure that your principal, in this case the Secretary General, gets to his appointments on time, has a bottle of water if he needs it, has someone to carry his bag. And essentially, it's a babysitting position. But your key role is to make sure the guy gets out of the country, all in one piece. As the funeral drew to a close, there were 67 or 69, I can't remember how many, but heads of state there to say goodbye to a man, King Hussein, who'd done so much in the Middle East and had tried so hard for world peace. So there was this major traffic jam at the airport. Now, protocol dictates when the American president gets on Air Force One, that plane takes off, no matter whether he's left behind his mother, his aunt, his senior staffer, or the Secretary General. And we realized that nobody could find the Secretary General. He had disappeared from his control officer. And so I started running around the embassy saying, we've lost the Secretary General, we've lost the Secretary General. It would have been a really bad scene. Well, it turns out that the Secretary General had gotten a little tired of waiting in line. He'd gotten on a staff bus and had gone back to Air Force One and was sitting in his seat, sleeping. He knew he wasn't lost. He didn't think that he was lost. My boss, the ambassador, didn't know he was lost. And I breathed a sigh of relief as that plane took off and we waved Air Force One fond farewell. To this day, I have a friend who, whenever she looks at me, screams, "We've lost the Secretary General, we've lost the Secretary General." So don't let that happen to you. If you see Jason, nail him to the floor. The UN also provided me with one of the more bizarre episodes of my diplomatic career. In 2009, you may recall a gentleman named Muammar Gaddafi, the leader of Libya. Well, he made his first trip to the United Nations for the first time in many, many years. He was going to give a speech to the General Assembly, and his visit represented a return of sorts to the international fold after the tragedies of Lockerbie of Pan Am 103 and Gaddafi's decision to turn over materials for the manufacturing of weapons of mass destruction to the international community. And his staff told us that he intended to come to Central Park and pitch his Bedouin tent. Now, he had taken this tent everywhere. He'd taken it to Rome, he'd taken it to the Arab Summit in Doha, he'd taken it to Moscow even, which seems to me it would have been rather cold. And he took it to Jordan, where he pitched the tent out in the back behind the palace, and finally King Abdullah, in his first reigning year, had to ask him to leave. As you might imagine, people in the US, the media, the Hill, people in Manhattan and New Jersey, they went ballistic. And so for 2 weeks we were round and around in the State Department between the Libyans, the UN headquarters staff, the Secret Service, who were responsible for guarding heads of state visiting the United States, and an increasingly angry group of New Yorkers who were worried about where the leader was going to end up. It turns out he was afraid of stairs and elevators, so he couldn't use either a hotel or the permanent representative's house. The Libyans told us that they would make this an issue in the bilateral relationship at a time that was particularly delicate as we were continuing to negotiate weapons of mass destruction issues. And the UN reminded us that in accordance with the headquarters agreement, we had to accept any leaders visiting the United Nations on official business, regardless of our own political inclinations or the screams in the media. So Q, that's what we called him, sort of impersonally, Q finally agreed to stay on Donald Trump's property in New Jersey. Yes, that Donald Trump. Until Trump finally decided the day before he was due to arrive that he really couldn't host the Libyan, and we scrambled once again to find somebody who would take the tent and Gaddafi. We did, and Gaddafi went on to give one of the more bizarre speeches in UN General Assembly history. It went on for 90 minutes, when normally heads of state are allocated 15. And its penultimate request to the international body is that they move the UN headquarters to Tripoli in Libya, because he had such jet lag coming from Libya to New York that he really didn't think he could do this again. Well, we sort of thought that would be a brilliant idea. Now, these anecdotes are amusing, and they highlight one of the aspects that I think to outsiders is so bizarre about the UN, and that's protocol. But there is a more serious and substantive side to the UN that often gets lost in all of that noise. I saw it up close and personal in my own career as I tramped alongside UN refugee coordinators trying to house expatriates who were escaping from Iraq and Kuwait during the first Gulf War. They set up feeding centers for Indians and Pakistanis who couldn't get home because their governments could not afford to airlift them out of that neutral zone between Iraq and Jordan. I saw it in Haiti, where UN pilots flew in the face of 4 horrible hurricanes that devastated wide parts of the country. They rescued people and they took supplies to areas that simply were not reachable any other way. And today the UN is deployed in some of the world's toughest areas under the most dangerous conditions. They're fighting cholera in Yemen. They're attempting to manage the flow of refugees from that horrific war in Syria. They're coping with the scourge of HIV/AIDS in Africa and elsewhere. So what I really want to underscore is how much the US gains from the UN and how important it is, despite its deficiencies in shaping our world. My IR professor here at William & Mary all those years ago, who thought and wrote widely on UN issues, often told us, when the big powers agree, the UN is irrelevant, and when they do not, it's impotent. And there's some truth to that. And even as I applaud the UN, I do recognize its limitations and its failures. It has not always lived up to its charter, much less the hopes of its founding members, which of course we were one. It is bureaucratic, it is didactic, and it is politicized, although frankly speaking, why anyone would be surprised by that is somewhat of a surprise to me. And it's damn slow to take responsibility for its own failings, as it should, when it has, in cases, for instance, of sexual abuse by its peacekeepers or major corruption in some of its agencies. In short, I would argue the UN pretty much mirrors the world and where we are today. Still, for all its shortcomings, I'd rather have the UN at our side as we navigate the world. No matter how effective your diplomacy, no matter how adept your diplomats, and we're pretty darn good, no matter how free your checkbook or how visible your military, the UN offers another dimension to policymaking. It's no surprise then that when the international community comes together to try and deal with some of the overarching issues of our day, like terrorism or violent extremism or major health issues, it's turned to the UN. Not that it fixes everything, but that it is another tool, as political scientists like to say, in our toolkit. So I have to tell you, I'm very pleased to see that even in these fraught political times, that the American people generally agree about the utility of the United Nations. For all the rhetoric of the last election, all the talking heads and the blah, 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 that support still cuts across party lines. Among voters overall, 88% say that the UN is either very important or somewhat important for the US to continue to work with. A large number, 75% of Trump voters say it is important for the US to maintain an active role in the United Nations. I would also add that I believe that engaging the UN, with all its inherent messiness and protocol and all that crap that you hear so much about, gives us something else besides paperwork and headaches about Bedouin tents. At its very best, it helps us fill in the pieces of a very complex political environment. It provides perspective, and I would argue that perspective is a critical element for looking at the world strategically and with sense. Bandwidth within governments today, even in our own, given its breadth, given its size, bandwidth is finite. It's far too easy to deal when dealing with complicated issues, to get trapped in the Washington narrative and the Washington point of view to the exclusion of all others. I know that from personal experience. It's very easy sitting in an office in Washington and think you know the answers. Sometimes you don't even know what the questions should be. Politicians, as we have found time and time again, ignore this rule at their peril. At the end of the day, what I think is that the UN offers us a different lens through which to see the world, which is one of the reasons why I like programs like this so much. I like the Model UN. They're fun. I remember mine being somewhat as a protracted slumber party. I think there was some work. I think we represented Ghana. But I would also like to think that the Model UN, like its namesake in New York, helps inform our interactions with the world. The skills and mental muscle that you are using this weekend are vital today, no matter what your future profession or where you end up at school. And these skills will provide you with the framework in which to understand and address a world that is reinventing itself with frightening regularity. The challenge is, as always, to read the lessons right. I also think that these skills that you're acquiring, that you have learned from your research, from your work, from your prep, that you will use this weekend, will make you a more astute citizen of the world and of this country. And if you travel abroad, if you have interactions with foreigners of any type, you become what I believe is America's greatest product, the accidental ambassador. Students, tourists, business people, executives, missionaries, all of us who live, travel, visit, study, work abroad, and those of you who welcome foreign visitors to our shores, you have a role as important as mine was in building bridges between peoples. As an American diplomat, I represented the United States and its people in some remarkable, indeed extraordinary circumstances. But I did not serve alone. I had accidental ambassadors by my side. Now, I love that phrase, accidental ambassadors, and I use it a lot. And some of my friends are getting a little tired of hearing about it. But I don't know a term that so rightly encapsulates what we do when we are engaged citizens with the world. Every time you venture out, every time you interact, every time you meet somebody that's got a passport a little different than your own, you can influence their views of our country, our values, our interests, our beliefs. You play an important role in the world. Now, I know there are those today who don't value this type of interaction, who decry alliances, who ignore friends. It's become popular in some circles to say that we can do it alone. I'm here to tell you we can't. I say so, but more importantly, history says so. Not in today's world. If you take away one message from this weekend and from my blathering on, I want to make sure it's the message that you have a duty to live in the world, not just of the world. This work is too important to leave to politicians or even diplomats, as much as it pains me to say. I believe in the power of people to people. And if you're cynical enough to question me, of course you wouldn't dare, but just in case you are, let me tell you about a missionary couple I met in Haiti. They were from Minnesota, and they were providing primary health care to children in a village that was 100 miles out of Port-au-Prince, the capital. But it was a 9-hour drive because the roads in Haiti are so bad. They had been there for more than 20 years. They'd raised their family there. They'd been there through coups and riots and rebellions and hurricanes and earthquakes. And they lived in a village that had never seen an American family until they showed up. They ignored all entreaties from us in the State Department that it's not safe, get out, you know, oh my God, it's gonna rain, you're gonna get wet. And they stayed. They stayed through it all. The work that they were doing was very important. They made a visible difference in the lives of these people on the ground. But just as important was the message of caring and engagement that their presence gave to the villagers. And on their part, this couple from Minnesota and their 3 kids, their takeaway from this experience, as the wife once told me, was something that she could never begin to explain to someone who'd never left the country. So that's where you come in. You may never become a journalist or a diplomat or Secretary General of the UN, although I urge you to think about it, but make your presence felt. And make this weekend the weekend that's the start of your personal engagement with the future. I think you've got a lot going for you. You're going to have a great time, and I wish you all the very best of luck. Thank you very much.